I should have replaced the gloves months ago. The leather had gone soft and peeled slightly at the wrists, but they still fit, still kept the memory of my hands. I wore them anyway when I walked into the bank. The woman behind the counter smiled too much. Her screen reflected in her glasses, blinking blue and green like the waiting light of something that would not arrive. The check was for $120,000. I placed it between two forms utility bills, nothing personal, and slid it across. The woman didn't comment. She just asked if I wanted to file a formal stop payment or mark it as void. I told her quietly that the service the money was intended for was no longer required. That morning, I hadn't put on makeup. Not out of protest, just because I didn't see the point. I hadn't been sleeping. My toothbrush still had a smear of dried paste from the day before. The last message I received from Jason came the night before. It lit up while I was folding towels at the shop. I didn't open it right away. Just let it sit on the screen while the dryer clicked behind me. Hey, Mom. Just the ceremony, okay? The dinner's kind of full already. I thought maybe I'd read it wrong. I read it again. There was no explanation, no apology, just a soft suggestion to disappear after the vows were over. I went home, set my phone down on the kitchen table, and stared at the envelope I'd addressed earlier that week. It still had his name on it. Jason Andrew Barrett, written in ink that had begun to fade at the loop of the J. The envelope had a smudge near the corner. I remember rubbing at it with my thumb. I remember it didn't come off. Later that night I called. He picked up, but only after the second ring. His voice didn't hold much. It used to tilt up when he said Mom. This time it was flat. She was with him, Caroline. I could hear her faintly pouring something in the background. Maybe wine, maybe not. He didn't ask how I was. He said, "It's just that her side. There's a lot of people flying in. Corporate friends, family friends, that sort of thing." He said, "We thought it might be easier if you didn't mention the business. Some of them come from a different background." He said, "You'll still be there, just for the most important part." I don't remember if I responded. There was a pause longer than it needed to be. Then Caroline's voice, light but clipped. "It's not that we don't want you there, Mrs. Barrett. It's just about presentation." She pronounced presentation the way a florist says seasonal. "You understand, right?" It wasn't a question. I touched the napkin on the table beside me. It had a ring of coffee barely visible. I'd refilled the cup 3 times that day and never drank more than a few sips. The handle had chipped years ago. I kept it anyway. I didn't know why. Jason spoke again, but it felt like an afterthought. "It's just one evening. You don't have to stay for the whole thing." I didn't hang up. I let the silence do it for me. Afterward, I walked upstairs and opened the box where I kept the dress. Dark blue. Simple, with a line of beading near the cuffs. I'd picked it because it looked like something his father would have liked. I touched the fabric. It was smooth but thin, the kind that wrinkles quickly when nobody's looking. The shoes were under the bed. I didn't take them out. I stood at the window for a while. It had rained earlier, just enough to leave streaks on the glass. The lawn was overgrown, and I noticed one of the solar lights had gone dim. Downstairs, the dryer buzzed twice. I didn't go back to the shop. In the morning, I made a list of things to do: call the bank, cancel the florist, notify the photographer. Not because I wanted to ruin anything. I just didn't see why I should pay for something I wasn't invited to finish. There was a receipt still pinned to the fridge. Catering $18,750. $50. It fluttered when the door opened. I made toast. It burned. I ate it anyway. The woman at the counter wore a name tag. Melinda. Her hair was clipped back in a barrette the shape of a leaf. When she handed me the confirmation slip, she said, "Is there anything else we can help with today?" I shook my head. Outside, I stood beside my car longer than necessary. There was a scratch on the driver's side mirror I hadn't noticed before. Back home, I turned on the porch light, though it wasn't dark yet. I sat down with a yellow legal pad and wrote out everything I'd spent in the last 6 months, engagement dinner deposit, for the band the monogrammed napkins Caroline insisted on. The total came out to more than I'd expected. I stopped counting after 92. I kept the legal pad. I didn't cross anything out. I didn't underline. Later that day, I cleaned the mirrors, not for anyone, just because the smudges were starting to multiply. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't call Marilyn. I didn't even tell Clara at the shop. I went in, clocked hours, folded sheets, scrubbed the soap trays like I always had. The gloves stayed in my bag. I didn't wear them again. They're still there, actually, creased at the knuckle, lined with the faint smell of starch and dryer lint. I reach for them sometimes, and then don't. The phone buzzed once more before midnight. I didn't read it. I recognized the preview, something about understanding and not taking it personally. There's a crack on the wall behind the stove. It's always been there. It looks like a question mark if you stand at the right angle. I stood there a while, and then I sat down. And then I did nothing. Some people speak of fairness like it's something real, something you can hold in both hands and measure. I've never trusted anything that fragile. There was a cabinet in the back of the shop where I kept the spare buttons. Most were mismatched, gathered over the years, left behind in shirt pockets fallen into the linings of coats. I once found a tiny gold one with a fleur-de-lis, clearly from a child's costume. I kept it, even though it served no purpose. It's still in a small tin marked Miss. I think that's how they see me now, miscellaneous. When Caroline hosted a baby shower for her college friend, someone with a double-barreled last name and a dog with a hyphen in its Instagram handle, I heard about it 2 days after. The pictures were online. Balloons in cream and gold embossed name cards, a table of macarons arranged like a spiral staircase. Jason's voice on the phone was low, rehearsed. You wouldn't have known anyone. And it was more of a young crowd thing. He didn't wait for a reply. I opened a tin of polish that night and sat with his father's shoes, the ones I'd kept in the hall closet. I rubbed the scuff marks in small circles, even though no one was going to wear them again. Months earlier, I had embroidered a set of handkerchiefs. I used pale thread, the kind that fades gently over time. Caroline thanked me with a smile that didn't hold. I never saw them again. When I visited their apartment just once, I noticed a box in the hallway closet labeled Maid Gifts, not for display. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. The week Caroline's family scheduled the dress fitting, I overheard it from Marilyn, not Jason. I called to ask casually if they needed help with errands that day. He paused for a second too long. Didn't want to trouble you. Figured you'd be buried in towels. That was the term he used. Buried. I went to the shop that day and organized the detergent bottles by weight, a habit I picked up during the slow years. At the engagement dinner, her father made a toast. To the Prescotts and the future we're building. I raised my glass, though no one looked in my direction. The waiter cleared my plate before I'd finished. Later, Caroline approached me with a careful smile. You don't need to bring anything to the rehearsal dinner, just yourself, and maybe keep things light. She brushed a hair from her shoulder. I remember noticing the tag of her blouse sticking out slightly. I could have tucked it in. I didn't. Jason asked for help with the venue deposit after that. Then the flowers. Then the dress. I handed him the checks without counting the zeros out loud. He always said thank you, but only once did he look me in the eye. Caroline's parents covered her sister's wedding. $500,000. We're doing this our way, I nodded. There was a receipt in my wallet for a sandwich I never ate. I kept it there until the ink faded. That day, I'd driven to the shop, parked, and just sat in the car for an hour holding the sandwich bag like a letter no one would read. During a family brunch, someone, an uncle of Caroline's, maybe asked what I did. Before I could speak, Jason answered for me. She owns a small operation, local stuff. Not once did he say my name. Not once did he say his childhood bedroom was above the dryer vents, or that the sound of sheets tumbling was the closest thing he had to lullabies. I don't remember who paid for that meal. I only remember Caroline handing me the leftovers and saying, "Hope you like kale. It's organic." I put the container in the fridge and threw it out 3 days later, unopened. There was a photo of the Prescott family on their holiday card, 4 generations, crisp collars, silverware polished to reflection. My name was not mentioned. The envelope read, "To Jason's family." I folded it once and placed it in the bottom drawer beneath the warranty papers for the washing machines. The edges curled by spring. Each request for help came with a deadline and a thank you. Each thank you came with a clause. "We really appreciate it, but please don't mention this to her parents. They're very structured. It would be cleaner if the story was that we handled it ourselves." You understand discretion, right? That word. Discretion. Once Jason called it my best quality. That used to feel like a compliment. At the laundromat, I sorted whites and colors. There's a rhythm to folding pillowcases that feels almost sacred. Tuck, press, stack. Tuck, press, stack. The human body can learn to do anything without noise. At home, I kept the receipts in a manila folder labeled J+C. I never said their names aloud while writing it. I didn't want to make it more real than it already was. There's a candle on my kitchen table shaped like a pear. Emily gave it to me 3 years ago for Mother's Day. I've never lit it. The wick is still white. Jason once asked me why I kept useless things. "You don't even burn it." "What's the point?" I told him some things weren't meant to be used. "That sounds like an excuse for hoarding." He laughed when he said it. The kind of laugh that leaves no mark. I opened the checkbook again last week and stared at the carbon copies. My name was there, over and over in ink that pressed deep enough to bleed through the next page. And yet nowhere else. When Caroline's sister sent the registry link, I scrolled for a long time. Everything was expensive, curated metallic. I bought nothing. I printed the list, folded it once, and placed it with the others. I've always known how to step aside. Some people call it grace. But I think it's just that I got used to holding my breath. Some people vanish slowly like ink left too long in the sun. I used to think disappearing was something that happened all at once. I don't remember when Caroline stopped using my name. Maybe she never did. I became Jason's mom. In conversation, sometimes softened into his mother like a placeholder in a script no one planned to memorize. At the engagement dinner, her aunt leaned over during the salad course and said, "It's so sweet that you're still involved, considering everything." I nodded, though I didn't know what she meant by everything. The place cards were done in gold calligraphy. I searched the table twice before realizing mine read Mrs. Barrett tucked beneath a miniature hydrangea. Caroline's grandmother was seated closer to the couple. They'd flown her in from Charleston. That night, I folded the napkin from the dinner and placed it in my coat pocket. It still had the faint scent of lemon oil and starch. Weeks earlier, I had spent 2 afternoons cutting ivory paper and tying ribbon by hand. I thought a homemade wedding invitation might feel more personal, something tactile in a season that was beginning to feel like a spreadsheet. Caroline held the sample card between her fingertips, as if testing for dust. "Oh, that's quaint. But we've already contracted a stationer in Milan." She smiled while saying it. Jason looked at the table. At the rehearsal walkthrough, I stood by the doors near the back of the sanctuary. The coordinator handed out folders, labeled with names. Prescott, Sinclair, Drayton, Avery. Mine was marked mother of groom. The ink was slightly smudged, as though someone had touched it before it dried. No one asked if I had questions. The photographer introduced himself to everyone on Caroline's side with a handshake and a joke. When it came to me, he adjusted his lens and said, "You must be support staff." Mine stepping to the left for a clean shot, I stepped. At brunch the following week, Caroline's mother placed her napkin across her lap, unfolded with perfect symmetry. "Jason mentioned your line of work. It's admirable to still be productive at your age." She didn't look up from her tea. "I wouldn't last a day in all that lint." I offered a smile. She turned to her sister and changed the subject to hardwood floors. Later, Jason brought me aside and said, "Maybe avoid bringing up work stuff around her. They have a very different lifestyle." He spoke quietly, as if worried the walls would carry echoes. I didn't reply. I looked down at my shoes, noticed the small tear in the lining. I'd meant to fix it. I hadn't. At a family gathering, Caroline's father gave a toast to the future leaders of this family. I wasn't sure who he meant, but I knew it wasn't me. I clinked my glass anyway. The sound didn't travel. That night, I found the envelope they'd sent with the save the date card. The handwriting was from a calligrapher. My name had been misspelled. 1 N instead of 2. Linda became Lida. I didn't mention it. On a video Caroline posted from the engagement party, someone tagged her family, her sisters, her college roommate, the florist. I wasn't in the frame. I was standing off to the left, cropped out by a potted plant. One comment read, "Such a stunning event. Love how close you all are." There was no mention of my name. At a dinner with Caroline's extended relatives, someone asked if Jason was an only child. Before I could open my mouth, she answered, "Yes. And we're all so proud of how far he's come, especially considering the circumstances." No one clarified what those circumstances were. After dessert, I helped clear plates. In the kitchen, a younger cousin offered me a soft smile. "I hope you feel included. It must be weird coming into a family like this." I handed her a serving spoon and nodded. I began collecting the cards they mailed, the formal ones, the glossy ones, the ones with thick envelopes and raised letters. I kept them in a drawer beneath the warranty paperwork and appliance manuals. When I ran out of space, I bundled them with twine and placed them in an old shoebox. The name on each was addressed to the Barrett residence. Never my name. Never just me. Once Caroline handed me a stack of menus to review for the tasting. "Just to be thorough, we probably won't go with any of your suggestions, but it's nice to include everyone." She walked away before I could answer. Jason once mentioned that Caroline's parents were sticklers for image. He said it like a compliment, as if curated people made for better conversations. They're very precise. They know what fits and what doesn't. The way he said it, I wasn't sure which category I belonged to. During a meeting about seating arrangements, someone from the planning team asked if I would prefer to be near the groom's side or at the overflow table for extended family. Caroline looked at the chart and pointed to a table by the hallway. "Let's place her here. It'll be more comfortable. Less direct exposure." Jason didn't object. I made a note in my calendar that evening: bring sweater, table near vent. There's a coat I wear to family events, not because it's my favorite, but because no one remembers seeing it before. It has a small tear in the lining that I've never repaired. I once heard Jason describe his childhood to one of Caroline's cousins. He mentioned the neighborhood, the school, the summer programs. He said nothing about the shop or the nights I stayed up washing uniforms by hand when the dryer broke, or the time we ate canned soup for a week so he could go on the 8th grade trip to Washington. We all came from something, he said. But what matters is where we're going. I suppose I was part of that something. When the florist asked for family photos to include in the slideshow, I sent 3. None of them made it in. Caroline said they didn't match the aesthetic. She used that word, aesthetic. The next morning, I went into the shop and scrubbed the lint trap until it shined. The brush left a red mark on my knuckle. I didn't cover it. A customer asked if I had plans for the weekend. I told her I'd be attending something important. I didn't say what. Some names are never forgotten. Some names are never spoken. Mine lived somewhere in between. People don't always cut you out with knives. Sometimes it's with paper. Typed clean, folded into thirds, I had a folder marked wedding expenses. It wasn't labeled at first, just a plain blue folder I kept tucked beneath a stack of catalogs and order forms. I added the label when the totals started repeating. Emily came by without calling. She does that sometimes, usually with something sweet from the bakery and some new theory about the world. That day, she brought me a paper bag with lemon squares and leaned over the counter looking at the folder like it had been left open by accident. She flipped through a few of the invoices, tent rental transportation a deposit on the venue listed under her uncle's name. Her hand stopped on the page marked insurance disbursement, withdrawal confirmed. She didn't say anything right away, just ran her finger along the column of numbers. Does Uncle Jason know this came from the policy I didn't answer? She folded the folder closed slowly, with the kind of care people use when putting flowers back into water. I went to their apartment last week, she said, pulling up a stool. Mom asked me to drop off a jacket for Aunt Caroline. They didn't know I was there. She reached into her bag, pulled out a napkin, started tearing at one corner like it was thread. I heard her say it. I heard it clearly. Once the wedding's over, we won't have to deal with Linda anymore. That'll be the last check and then we're done. I didn't move. She said it like she was talking about a plumber she'd overpaid. Emily's voice wasn't angry. She sounded tired in a way I hadn't heard from someone that young. You don't have to go, you know. She didn't mean the wedding. She meant all of it. After she left, I washed the same cup 3 times. Not because it was dirty, but because the handle felt cold in a way I couldn't explain. The cup had a hairline crack beneath the glaze. I'd been using it for 15 years. Every time I poured coffee, the line caught a little light, like something whispering it was still there. That night, a message appeared on my phone. Thanks again for everything, Mom. Can't wait to see you tomorrow at the church. Just the ceremony, remember. No invitation to the dinner, no update on the seating chart, no signature. I looked at the checkbook beside the lamp. The last entry was still crisp, 120,000 even. My pen had pressed too hard, leaving a dent in the carbon paper underneath. I didn't tear the check out. I didn't rip it up. I just looked at the handwriting and tried to remember if it was mine. Jason once told me I had neat cursive. I don't think he's seen it in years. There was a time when he used to sign his name with little circles for the dots above the J's. I used to tease him, call it his CEO signature. He liked that. The dress I'd planned to wear was hanging behind the door. I hadn't tried it on since the tailor pinned the hem. There was still a bit of thread clinging to one edge pale against the navy. The shoes were in their box, untouched. I opened the refrigerator and saw the container of fruit salad I'd made 2 days ago. It had started to sink. The grapes floated. I threw it away without opening the lid. There's a light in the hallway that flickers when the wind comes in too strong. I hadn't replaced the bulb. I liked the way it blinked like it was thinking. Caroline once told me she preferred warm light over cool, said it made the photographs more flattering. We all need help looking like we belong. She looked right at me when she said it. I smiled. Not because I agreed, because I had nothing left to offer. That week, a new envelope had arrived. Printed return address. Heavy cardstock. Inside itinerary for guests on the Prescott list. Spa appointments, shuttle service, dietary options. Nothing with my name. Jason had forwarded the digital version to me without comment. No greeting, no closing. Just a subject line in case you need it. There was a map included. I wasn't on it. At the shop, I added up the receipts. The numbers lined up in uneven columns. 17 entries in total. None of them reimbursed. I didn't need them to be. But I noticed. Clara knocked on the office door and asked if I'd be attending the rehearsal dinner. I told her I wasn't needed there. She nodded like she already knew. When I got home that evening, I walked into the kitchen and stood in front of the dishwasher without opening it. The drying cycle had finished hours ago. The cutlery inside had fogged the glass. Jason once asked if I planned to leave the business to anyone. I told him it wasn't the kind of thing you pass down. He didn't respond. That had been 2 years ago. He never brought it up again. There's a drawer in my bedroom with all the letters Frank wrote me. I haven't read them in a while, but I know they're still folded in thirds, still held closed with ribbon that's gone gray. I added the wedding program to that drawer, not out of sentiment, just because I didn't know where else to put it. At the bottom of the guest list, there was a note, "Do not reassign table 15." My name wasn't there. I looked at the checkbook again, and I stopped being surprised. There's a sound a pen makes when it glides over something final. It isn't loud. It's not the sound of a door slamming or glass breaking. It's smaller, almost kind. I held the checkbook at an angle to catch the light the way I used to when double-checking amounts at the shop. Line by line, I read what I'd written, dates, initials, notations in the margin. 120,000 wedding expenses. The W curled slightly too much to the left. I called the bank just before 6. I didn't wait for them to open. I pressed the numbers, then the extensions, then the ones that said other. A man named Dennis answered, though I wouldn't have known his name if he hadn't said it twice. I gave the check number. I spoke each digit carefully, the way I used to dictate Jason's spelling words. He asked if I wanted to cancel the payment. The transaction is no longer appropriate. He asked if I needed assistance disputing the charge. No dispute. Just cancel it. There was silence, some typing, and then a short confirmation. I didn't write it down. I didn't text Jason. I didn't call Caroline. The coffee pot was still warm. I poured half a cup and drank it standing up. The bitter edge reminded me of early mornings before deliveries when Frank would leave a thermos by the front door. I folded the checkbook closed and slid it back into the kitchen drawer. Not the drawer where we kept things in order. The other one. The drawer with coupons that had expired 3 years ago, a tin of birthday candles, and a key to something I no longer remembered. I looked at the fridge. A save the date still hung beneath a magnet shaped like a miniature dustpan. Caroline had chosen gold script on a white background. No photos, just their names, hers first. I didn't pull it down. I didn't touch it. I changed into the gray cardigan, the one with sleeves that stretched just a little at the wrists, the one Emily once called predictable. It had a hole at the hem I hadn't fixed. I wore it anyway. The lawyer's office answered on the second ring. Marilyn Keene still used the same receptionist she'd had for 2 decades, a woman with a sharp voice and a soft name, Molly. She remembered my maiden name before I said it. "You want to make changes to the family trust?" "No. I want to create a separate fund. Emily's name. Restricted access. Educational use only. Non-transferable." Marilyn didn't ask about the wedding. She just said, "I'll draft it this afternoon." I looked at the pearl button on my sleeve. One was missing. I hadn't noticed. By mid-morning, the documents were ready. I drove to the office. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I didn't tell anyone I was back. I signed next to a line that used to have Jason's name. It didn't anymore. "You sure about the amount?" Marilyn looked at me with the same eyes she'd used when Frank signed his DNR. 60,000, I said. Not a penny more. You want her parents listed as guardians? She doesn't need one. On the way out, I saw a bouquet on the receptionist's desk. White tulips in a glass vase. The card read, "Thanks for everything. You made it easier. no name. The florist's logo was printed crooked. I came home and stood in the hallway for a long time. The silence in the house was not empty. It was filled with the weight of things unsaid, of paper folded and placed in envelopes that would never be stamped, of casseroles never returned, of names once stitched on Christmas stockings and later unpicked. I opened the closet and looked at the navy dress, the one I had planned to wear, the one that still had the tag tucked into the seam, the one I had chosen after trying on 9 others and telling the salesgirl I needed something that didn't try too hard. It looked at me like a question. I folded it slowly, smoothing out the fabric, tucking in the sleeves. I placed it in the cardboard box we used for tax records. I didn't label it. Then I looked at the jewelry tray. The pearl necklace still lay curled in its case. The clasp had darkened slightly with time. I lifted it carefully, like I used to lift Jason's head when he slept on the couch after school. I fastened it around my neck. The pearls were cool. They settled just above my collarbone like they remembered how to fit me. There were no mirrors in the hallway. I walked to the kitchen. The window above the sink still had the streak I hadn't cleaned last week. Outside, a neighbor raked leaves into uneven piles. I poured the last of the coffee. It had gone tepid. I drank it anyway. The mail slot clicked. I didn't move to check it. I sat at the table. No pen, no phone, no list of things to do. My hands rested palm down. A memory surfaced Jason as a boy, standing on a chair to reach the cereal cabinet, and Frank behind him, just in case. I could still hear his voice. If he falls, let him fall small. I had thought at the time that it was heartless. Now I understood. I took the church bulletin from last Sunday and folded it in half, then in half again, until it made a neat square. I tucked it into the side of the drawer where I used to keep birthday cards. The last one I received from Jason still said, "Thanks for everything," in pre-printed font. No handwriting. The refrigerator motor buzzed, then went quiet again. I didn't call Emily. I didn't drive to the church. I didn't tell anyone what had changed. I walked to the front door, placed my hand on the knob, and stood still. The lock clicked once when I turned it. Not to leave, just to know I could. And that was enough. The chair didn't creak when I sat. It had once, but Frank had fixed it with 2 wood screws and a half-spoken promise that it wouldn't last long. It did. I stirred the tea slowly, watching the string from the bag twist around the spoon. The radio, soft and unsteady, played a song I didn't recognize. I let it play anyway. Light came through the side window, not directly, but angled, filtered. It made the floor look cleaner than it was. On the table was the contract, 2 pages signed and dated. The scholarship fund had its own name now, not mine, not Jason's. Just the initials of someone who still knocked before entering. I didn't go to the church. I didn't wear the dress. I folded the note from the bank and placed it in the back of the drawer with the warranty slips and appliance manuals. No folder, no label. I washed the same 3 dishes I'd used the night before. No more. The sound of porcelain in water had changed. It felt less like routine, more like ritual. Emily stopped by around 3. No announcement. She carried a small paper bag with a grease spot near the bottom and a folded brochure tucked beneath her arm. The kind printed on thick cardstock where the university logo is too large and the font's too serious. She opened the bag on the counter. Peanut butter cookies. Slightly overbaked. I forgot the timer. They still taste okay. They look just fine. She placed the application on the table and didn't say anything else. I poured tea into the mug with the hairline crack and set it in front of her. Not the fancy cups, just the ones we always used. The mug had belonged to Frank. She didn't mention it. I didn't either. We sat in silence for a while. Not awkward, not expectant. The kind that lets the clock tick at its own pace. Caroline's mom posted a photo, said it was a perfect day. I'm sure it was. You're not curious, I already know how it ended. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That kind of smile doesn't last long anyway. I cleaned the sugar bowl after she left. There were 2 grains stuck at the bottom, hardened by something sticky. I scraped them out with the back of a spoon and rinsed the glass in hot water. The attic stairs made the same hollow knock they always did. I took the photo albums one by one, stacked them without sorting. The ones from the pumpkin patch, the birthday at the skating rink, the school play, where Jason wore the wrinkled tie. I didn't look too long, just enough to remember where the corners had curled, where tape had peeled. I wrapped them in brown paper, the kind from grocery bags, and used a black marker to write, "Keep, but not often." I placed them on the top shelf, near the box of Christmas lights and the jar labeled Buttons Various. The phone didn't ring. I left it that way. I swept the kitchen even though it wasn't dirty. Dust lives in corners, no matter how clean the house feels. A neighbor's dog barked 3 times, then stopped. I opened the drawer beneath the oven and took out the baking tray I hadn't used in months. I greased it lightly, rolled small balls of dough, and spaced them evenly. Not perfect, just enough apart. The cookies cracked slightly as they cooled. I left the radio on. You could still call him. He knows where I live. He might be waiting. For what? That part stayed in my head. It didn't go further than that. The sun dipped slowly without warning. The shadows stretched across the floor in strange, unfamiliar shapes. I didn't turn on the overhead light. Just the lamp near the door, the one with the fabric shade that makes everything softer. I folded laundry that didn't need folding. A white towel, a plain blouse, a pair of socks missing a mate. In the corner of the room sat a glass jar with 6 quarters 2 dimes and a button that had no thread. I labeled it, "Start Here." I put the last cookie in a small tin and left it by the window. Emily would find it if she came back. If not, it would keep. The mail came late. 2 circulars, a credit card offer, and a church bulletin addressed current resident. I placed it under the magnet with the sunflower just to keep the balance on the fridge. I didn't read it. By the sink was a dish towel I had bought at a yard sale. It had a stitched line along the edge that had started to fray. I folded it in half and laid it across the oven handle. I closed the pantry door gently, no click. Just the soft seal of something returned to its place. Outside, the wind moved without urgency. Inside, I moved the chair half an inch away from the table. Just enough room to sit, but not enough to be waiting. And then I did nothing at all. I never thought silence could echo louder than voices. My phone lit up 27 times before noon. Each call came with the same name. I didn't answer. The screen dimmed, then brightened again, then again. I turned it over, let the vibration hum against the table like a trapped insect. An hour later, the first message arrived. "You caused this. The hotel canceled. Do you understand what you've done?" I watched the text bubble fade into stillness. I didn't type back. I didn't even open the next one, though. I read the preview. "Do you want your grandchild to be born without a roof?" The word "your" was underlined on its own in my mind. Possession was suddenly a threat, as if biology was leverage. I left the phone on the counter and went to refill the coffee. The mug still had yesterday's stain around the rim. I didn't scrub it. I just poured fresh on top, watched the darkness rise. The inbox filled slowly throughout the day. A scanned letter from a lawyer. The Prescott family crest at the top. Gold foil seal. 2 pages overly polite. "We expect you to honor your financial commitments." That was the phrase, typed in bold. But I'd never signed anything. There were no contracts, just hands held out and the kind of trust you don't put on paper because you believe you'll be seen. The last line of the letter read, "Failure to comply may be interpreted as intrafamilial financial misconduct." I read it twice, then a third time quietly, as if reading it out loud in my head might change the tone. By the time Jason arrived, the porch light had just clicked on. He didn't knock. He pounded. It rattled the glass. I watched from the window. He looked older, or maybe just more rushed. "You need to fix this." His voice cut through the door like a key that didn't fit the lock. "You think this is just about a party, you've ruined everything." I didn't open the door. "You're destroying our future. Mine, Caroline's, our babies." The word "our" had weight, but none of it was mine. "You think this house means anything anymore? You think you'll die here, surrounded by detergent and receipts?" I reached for the light switch. I didn't flick it. I only touched it, held it for a second, then let go. His footsteps faded slowly, not in shame, not in regret, just distance. I went to the kitchen, turned the radio dial, not for music, just the static between stations. Something unformed, unclaimed. Later that night, another message came, this one shorter. "We're discussing legal options." No greeting, no sign-off, no name. I picked up the old notepad I used for grocery lists. The top page had a penciled line, "Bleach eggs, Emily's tea." I tore it off. On the next page, I wrote the name of the lawyer from the email. Just the name. No reaction. No follow-up. I folded it once and placed it under the refrigerator magnet shaped like a teacup. The magnet had a chip in the handle. I never glued it back. I liked it that way. Honest. Unrepaired. The mailman brought an envelope the next morning. Heavy. Cream-colored. A bill from the venue company. Not addressed to me, but forwarded anyway. Outstanding balance, $37,650. The paper smelled faintly of vanilla. I placed it on the table under a spoon. The spoon still held a smudge of blackberry jam. I hadn't used jam in weeks. That evening, the doorbell rang again. Not Jason this time. A woman in a pantsuit. Hair pinned. Folder in hand. "I'm here on behalf of," I raised a hand. Not to silence her. Just to hold the air steady. "There's no record of obligation, Mrs. Whitaker, but they insist. Their family, after all. That word again, bent out of shape. Stretched like taffy until it no longer meant what it used to." I walked to the kitchen and returned with the envelope from the venue. I handed it to her without a word. She glanced at it. Nodded once. When she left, I closed the door with 2 fingers. It made no sound. Later, the phone buzzed again, this time from Caroline. "Actions have consequences, you know. You raised Jason better than this. Or maybe you didn't." I turned the phone face down. The glass against wood felt cool. Somewhere in the drawer beneath old menus and takeout chopsticks, I found the button from Jason's first-grade jacket. Blue plastic with a scratch down the middle. He'd cried when it came loose. I'd sewn it back on that same night. Now it sat in my palm like a marble. Weightless and full. They came back, but not for me, not to apologize, not to understand. They came back for the check that didn't clear the balance, that didn't settle, the image that didn't match the invitations. They used the word legacy like a shield. They used baby like a flag. I sat at the table and poured another cup of coffee. The stain from yesterday circled the bottom of the mug. I didn't wipe it away. I don't think anything really changes overnight. But sometimes a silence feels different, like it came from somewhere new. I had the documents notarized in the back office of the laundromat. Clara brought lemon scones and 2 thermoses of black coffee. We didn't speak much. She looked over the figures twice and signed the buy-in with a quiet nod. I slid my half of the papers into a folder, folded the receipt in thirds, and wrote her name on the label. Clara, 49%. I didn't need more than that. I kept 6%, just enough to stop by on Wednesdays and fold towels without being asked why. That afternoon, I cleaned out the drawer beneath the counter. There was a blue apron with my name stitched into the strap, faint and nearly unthreaded. I folded it, placed it under a stack of old vendor invoices, and left it there without closing the drawer. At home, the catalog from the community center was still sitting by the phone. I hadn't circled anything yet. I flipped to the last page and found it Intro to Watercolor. No experience necessary. Just bring a brush. I didn't own one, but that didn't stop me. I called the number paid in full and hung up before they could offer to email a receipt. The first class was held in a room that smelled faintly of pencil shavings and linseed oil. The instructor wore a jacket with elbow patches and called everyone my friend. I sat in the back near the window. I didn't paint anything. I watched the way light softened the edge of the supply cart. That was enough. I returned the next week, and the next, and then again. When Emily knocked on the door with a manila envelope in hand, I already knew. She didn't speak right away, just unzipped her jacket and handed it to me. There was a letter on top, admissions from Northwestern. I recognized the color of the seal. She pulled out her phone and opened an email pre-med. Accepted. I looked at her. She looked back. I used the essay you helped me start, the one about Grandpa Frank's cufflinks. I nodded and placed the envelope on the table. I'm going to work part-time too. I want to keep the scholarship. I poured her tea, the kind with dried orange peel, and added a spoonful of honey. She smiled and looked down. I know it's not your responsibility. She didn't know what that sentence meant to me. She didn't have to. I folded the envelope again carefully and placed it in the drawer with the good napkins. Later, I found the pearl necklace again, the one Frank gave me for our 20th anniversary. One of the pearls had a slight chip near the clasp. I used to wear it to all the family holidays. I hadn't touched it in years. I held it against my collarbone, then clasped it and left it on. That same week, Sarah dropped by without calling. She stood in the doorway with her hands in her jacket. Her voice was sharp, practiced. Jason's been saying you're not well, that you're confused, that maybe you didn't understand what you were agreeing to. I didn't move. He said you promised the money, that you changed your mind suddenly, that you've been... I didn't let her finish. I opened a drawer and pulled out the small folder I'd prepared. Every copy, every check, every email, neatly printed, tabbed, time-stamped. I handed it to her, wordless. She took it. After a long pause, she placed it on the side table without looking at it. He also said you told Emily you were going to cut him out completely, that you're unstable. I poured her coffee. No sugar, just the way she hated it. He's scared, she added. Not of you, of how people will see him when this gets around. I folded a dish towel and placed it over the cup. She didn't drink. I didn't ask her to stay. She stood by the doorway for a moment before leaving the folder untouched. I placed it back in the cabinet beside the safe. I had already added the duplicates to a sealed envelope labeled, "If Needed." It sat beneath the deed to the house. That night, I walked past the spare room. The walls were still pale blue. I had kept the twin bed, the quilt folded tight across the top. I had once imagined Jason's child sleeping there. Now it was just a room, with clean corners. Caroline hadn't reached out again. Not directly. But there had been a message forwarded from her sister to Clara, who read it aloud at the end of her shift, without asking if I wanted to hear. She's telling people you manipulated her, that she was misled, that the baby might be born without a proper nursery. Clara waited, but I didn't say anything. She also said, Linda always acted like a martyr. But in the end, she showed her true colors. I folded the lint filters into a new stack and placed them in the basket. At the watercolor class that week, I painted for the first time. Not a scene, just shapes. A corner of something wooden, a blurry reflection, the edge of a cup with a chipped rim. When I stepped back, one of the women in front looked over and said, "Oh, that's quiet." She didn't mean it as an insult. I went home and looked at the old apron again. The thread where my name had once been was unraveling into loose cotton loops. I didn't fix it. That night, I set a timer for nothing. I made tea with no sugar. I opened no letters. I placed the chipped pearl back in its box, closed it, and did not lock it. Some stories continue whether you speak or not. But some stories, if left alone, find a way to write themselves without your name in them. And I didn't mind. I used to think the walls would remember. Not the people, not the pictures, but the walls. The way they held in voices after arguments, or let light fold into the room just so, when Jason sat by the window with a book too big for his lap. The realtor told me the kitchen had character. I didn't say anything. I just looked at the stain near the dishwasher, the one from the time the pipe burst at 2 a.m. Frank had taken it as a personal failure. I remember him on his knees with a flashlight in his mouth and a towel slung over one shoulder. The towel frayed and soft, the kind you never throw away. The couple buying the house didn't ask much. They liked the yard. I let them walk through the rooms on their own. I stayed by the garage holding the envelope with the title documents. I'd already signed everything. I just needed to hand it off. At the notary office, my pen left a faint smear on the edge of the last page. I didn't wipe it. I looked at my name and thought, this is the last time it'll appear in that address. The mailbox came off easy. One screw was already loose. I set it beside the porch rail, not out of sentiment, but because it felt wrong to toss it into the recycling bin. The red flag still stuck when pulled. Emily came to help me pack. I told her just the books and some kitchenware. The rest I'd already donated. She held up a drawing Jason had made in 2nd grade, a dog with antlers. I didn't correct her when she assumed it was a reindeer. The photo from Jason and Caroline's wedding had been sitting in a drawer since the week after the ceremony. I removed the frame, wiped the glass, and folded the picture in half right down the center where their hands touched. Then I smoothed it and placed it on the center of the empty dining table. No note, no explanation, just that. Caroline called while I was folding towels. The ringtone was still her old tone, the one Jason set when they got engaged. I let it ring the full 3 times. Then the voicemail buzzed, and a few seconds later, her text came through. You still owe us $87,450. That's not just a number, it's our future. I didn't respond. 2 hours later, a follow-up message arrived. We'll take legal action. You left us stranded. Don't think we'll forget. I opened my email and forwarded the thread to Marilyn. Subject line for your records. Then I replied to Caroline. Please submit any formal claim through legal channels. I've passed all related documents to counsel. I didn't block her. I didn't delete the messages. I saved them to a folder named Financial, Personal. I made a copy on a flash drive and labeled it in pen. There was a moment near the end when I stood in the hallway between the bedrooms and pressed my hand against the wall, just to feel the shape of it, the warmth, as if touch could anchor memory. But it passed. I turned off the lights one by one, not out of ritual, just habit. When I got to the front door, I hesitated. Then I opened the closet and took out the wool coat Frank wore the winter before he passed. The lining was worn through in one sleeve. I folded it neatly and placed it over my arm. I didn't know yet if I'd keep it. When I walked outside, I didn't look back. A week later, I updated my address at the DMV. The clerk asked if I wanted to register to vote at my new location. I nodded. "Do you want to list any relatives who live with you?" she asked. I shook my head. She paused. "Emergency contact," I gave her Emily's name and number. She spelled it wrong the first time. I didn't correct her. She noticed and fixed it herself. At the new apartment, everything smelled like primer and quiet. The ceilings were lower, the windows older, but the floors didn't creak. I placed the kettle on the stove and unpacked 2 mugs. One had a chip near the handle. I kept it. The mail came 3 days later, a single envelope. No return address. Inside was a typed note. Not handwritten, not signed. "Regardless of your actions, we remain family. Blood is blood. You don't just walk away from that." I folded the note twice evenly and slid it between 2 pages of an old cookbook. I didn't tear it. I didn't respond. Emily stopped by with a basil plant in a ceramic pot shaped like a chicken. "It's stupid, I know," she said, setting it by the window. "But you said once you liked the way basil smelled in sunlight." I touched the leaves. They were soft, cool, slightly sticky. Jason didn't call. Neither did Caroline. But I saw a charge come through on one of the old joint accounts. They'd tried to use the old wedding fund number for a hotel deposit. Declined. I didn't laugh. I didn't feel anything bloom or tighten. I just closed the browser tab and made tea. When the lawyer confirmed the sale had been finalized, I sent 2 checks, one to the Community Arts Center, labeled General Donation, and one to Emily's future dormitory address labeled Books and Meals. I didn't write a note. She'd recognize the handwriting. At the bottom of a drawer, I found a button from Jason's baby coat. Ivory-colored, still sewn to a corner of fabric I'd kept by accident. I placed it in the old matchbox where I stored needles and spools. I didn't add anything else. I didn't go back to drive by the house. I didn't check if they'd replaced the mailbox. I didn't want to know who painted over the walls or if they took down the hooks Frank had drilled for the holiday lights. I'd done my part. I'd held on. I'd let go. Now I remembered the silence that came after a slammed door, not the slam itself. And I understood finally that memory doesn't ask for permission to fade. It just finds a quieter place to live. I no longer mind the sound of nothing. The ceramic teapot I bought from a weekend artist fair feels heavier when full. I like how it warms my hands while I wait. There's a fine crack along the lid, almost invisible, unless the light hits it a certain way. It doesn't leak. I kept it anyway. The chair across from me stays pushed in now. I still fold a napkin and place it beside the empty mug, though I don't know why. Some habits persist longer than the people who gave them meaning. There's a postcard beside the window, slightly curled at the corners. I mailed it to myself from Venice just to prove I'd gone. I didn't write much. Just the date and a single word "arrived." On the wall behind me, 3 of my paintings hang in uneven lines. I never fixed the spacing. One is a cluster of sunflowers, another a shoreline that could be anywhere, and the third half-face half-shape looks a little like Emily if you squint and forget what you're looking for. A letter arrived last week. Thick paper, bold ink. His name on the envelope, Jason Barrett. I didn't open it. I didn't throw it away either. I placed it in the 3rd drawer underneath the photo of Frank, in his old army coat, next to the pair of glasses he left behind. They don't fit me, but I keep them. Emily called this morning. Her voice came through the screen with a kind of light in it. "Guess what? I got an A in anatomy. That's the hard one." I smiled without needing to fake it. "You're Emily. Of course you did." She promised to visit during the break. Said she'd bake the apple tart I liked, the one with the thin crust and no cinnamon. I didn't remind her I'd given her that recipe. I didn't mention that the last time she made it, she burned it slightly, and we ate it anyway. Later, I watered the small aloe by the sink. I refilled the salt jar. I moved the chair by the window half an inch to the left. The light hit better that way. There was a moment, maybe 5 seconds, where I reached for the drawer again. Not to open the envelope, just to feel its presence. Instead, I closed it gently and left it there. I had nothing to add to the conversation it might contain. Caroline once said, "You always act like silence is wisdom, but sometimes it's just avoidance." She didn't stay long after that. The rug in the entryway still curls up at one corner. I step around it same as always. My hands aren't as steady now, but I've learned not to rush the tea. There's a kind of dignity in taking time. In the back room, the sculpture is still unfinished. I haven't given it a face. I don't think I will. There's power in not finishing certain things. It leaves room for change, for breath. When the window is open, I can hear the water move. Not loudly, just enough to remember I'm near something that doesn't need my control. There are no new names on my contact list, just the few that stayed. Clara, Marilyn, Emily. I know each of their ringtones. None of them begin with Mom. The mail carrier waved today. I waved back. I didn't sign anything this week. I didn't explain myself. I didn't check my bank account twice before sleeping. I didn't apologize. I folded laundry while the tea cooled. A soft t-shirt, a thin robe, a pair of socks with a missing heel. I didn't fix the hole. I wore them anyway. When I sat again by the window, the postcard caught the breeze and tipped slightly. I placed a stone on top of it, one I picked up in Maine 3 decades ago and never named. I lifted the sculpture. My palms left faint prints on the clay. They'll fade. Not everything needs to be remembered. Some things only need to be touched once. I didn't look at the clock. I didn't open the drawer. I didn't change my name. I just sat. And that was enough.